So therefore, we're not looking for a stranger.
Well, it's widely known that the Ramseys hired you as an expert to help them find Jean Bonnet's killer. You've been inside this investigation from the beginning. What's your thoughts? Have the Ramseys something to do with it, or is it somebody else?
John, I was tough on the Ramseys, particularly John Ramsey. At one point I said, John, I said, if you did it, I said, you're one great liar, because I've interviewed some great liars in my life.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, it is quite stunning that John Douglas, the very well-known FBI profiler, actually says...
When I said, John, I said, if you did it, I said, you're one great liar.
Why does John Douglas say this? I mean, it's not necessary for him to say it. It does make one wonder if he was thinking it, doesn't it? In a previous analysis posted just a few days ago, I said I'm going to provide my assessment of the broken window. Well, I actually wrote it quite a few days ago. I boiled it down to about 7 really important points, and we're going to deal with about half of them, about 3 of those points in this analysis. What's really quite astonishing when you take this whole idea that John broke the basement window, when did he do it, how did he do it, and why did he do it? I mean, all of that in a way is almost like a criminal investigation within a criminal investigation. Obviously, breaking a window isn't a very serious crime, especially if it's in your own house. But what you find when you investigate John just in this one particular aspect, some pretty crazy information emerges, such as John disappears at a certain point during the kidnapping phase. All of the Ramseys are gathered in the house and everybody else waiting for the kidnappers to call. And during this critical time, waiting for the kidnappers to call, John disappears. And we get information about this from Linda Arndt's report. She writes, there were at least 3 times when John Ramsey was not present in the den when the phone rang. I personally saw John Ramsey run to the den to answer the phone. So just imagine this. Everyone is waiting for the kidnapper to call. You've got this ransom note. Everything is in place because of this whole kidnapping thing. And John isn't even present. So is John taking the whole kidnapping thing seriously? Then elsewhere in a report, Arndt writes, at an unknown time between about 10:40 hours and 1200 hours, John Ramsey left the house and picked up the family's mail. I was not present when John left. I did witness John Ramsey opening his mail in the kitchen. And then blank also left the Ramsey home. Blank left sometime after 10:15 hours. Blank told, and I think that's a reference to Fleet. Now, I don't think it's true that John left the house. I just think for quite a long period of time, 80 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes, Linda Arndt didn't know where John was. Now, if you think about that, that is a really long period of time. What was John doing during this period of time? Now, for those of you who would poo-poo this whole thing of what's going on during this period of time, you might say, none of this is really a big deal. It's really the police that botched the case. You know, if you really want to talk about what messed up the entire case, it is what happened on the day after Christmas with Linda Arndt on scene. I would argue that the biggest thing that compromised the case happened 2 days later when Patsy Ramsey's sister, Pam Paul, staged a one-person raid of the crime scene where she was dressed as a police officer. And I really think you've got to juxtapose that event, which also went on for hours, where evidence was gathered and removed, compare that to this, where the evidence at least is still inside the house. In any event, in this analysis, we want to look at when was the window broken, how was it broken, was it broken from the inside of the house or the outside, and what is the critical clue that we've missed regarding this whole area of kind of conjecture around this broken window. We'll deal with the why. Why was it broken, when it was broken, in a follow-up analysis. If I don't get to that, please remind me. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So let's start off by whom. Broken by whom? Who broke this basement window? Well, if Linda Arndt's report is accurate, it suggests that John went into the basement ahead of everyone else and stood in front of all the windows as well. She writes the following: I had asked John if the doors to the house had been locked when the family went to bed last night. John told me that he personally checked all of the doors and all of the windows in the home this morning. That's the day after Christmas. All of the doors and windows were locked. Now, in John's own statement to the cops, he says he went down to the basement alone, inspected the basement window, touched the basement window, which left a fingerprint, but said nothing about it. So I don't think there's much of a mystery there. Who broke the basement window? Well, John tells us he did. According to John's own account, he broke the basement window. The part that's a little slippery is when that happened. And this really is the real mystery. John says it was broken months before, and Burke went on to Dr. Phil to back up his father's story. And Patsy has supported the story that the window was broken as well. In Steve Thomas's book, he quotes Patsy saying that she had personally hoovered up the glass. But the housekeeper hasn't confirmed the broken window narrative, and one would think she would know. And at least 3 police officers who were specifically looking for signs of forced entry didn't notice the broken window or the telltale signs of glass sparking back at their swooping flashlights. Let's go back to what John Douglas said.
I don't believe they did it. The note, in fact, to me reinforces that. There's too much minutia in it, too many details that's unnecessary in a ransom note. So they did not do it.
Now, the interesting thing about this comment about details is when you look at the Ramseys, are they not people who are detail conscious?
Well, I've not specifically read the autopsy report, but it is my understanding that they are not definitive about whether the substance in her digestive system was pineapple or not.
That is quite a specific analysis of the autopsy report that Patsy hasn't read. And then, of course, John says this.
And we don't know if that's significant or not. All we know is what we've told the police, and that is that neither Patsy or I gave JonBenet pineapple.
When John says we don't know whether that's significant or not, well, I can tell you the police think it's very significant. The detectives working on this case feel it's very significant. I think it's very significant. And in the same way that detail is important, the detail of the broken window is also very important. If we go back to accepting that the cops were right in collectively finding no signs of forced entry, although we must concede that it was dark and the basement window wouldn't have been easy to see from the outside, and did the intruder lower the grate after exiting, but forget the ransom note and left behind JonBenet as well, who had the opportunity to go down there unseen and break the window? Well, Fleet White, certainly, but also John Ramsey. Incredibly, Arndt reports that while they were waiting for the kidnapper to call, the phone rang 3 different times and John was AWOL. Now, I think if you're going to interview John, and John is saying that there was a kidnapper and somebody else wrote the ransom note and this needed to be taken seriously, why did he seem to be not taking it seriously? Because he was absent when everyone was primed and ready to get the call from the kidnapper. I mean, isn't that what everyone was there for, everyone was waiting for? We know that at another point in the morning, John was so completely and inexplicably invisible, Arndt thought he had left the house entirely. She assumed he'd gone to pick up the family's mail, because when the detective next saw John, he seemed to be calmly, nonchalantly going through the mail. But John didn't need to leave because the door had a mail slot. Now, one's got to wonder, was Arndt being paranoid, and it's possible that she was, or was Arndt's sixth sense actually accurate, that John seemed to be doing something strange and was acting in a nonchalant way? Well, sometimes people do that after they've done something that they shouldn't have done, and so perhaps that is what Arndt was picking up on. Curiously, when John was asked about him looking through the mail, he claimed he was looking for additional correspondence from the kidnapper. Now, how likely is that? for someone who had just missed 3 phone calls and would later apparently not notice the 10 a.m. deadline coming and going, this explanation seems a little dubious, doesn't it? Now, if John wasn't disappearing, it was also tough to keep track of by the solo officer on the scene. Again, was that by accident or by design? The fact that he was missing for 80 minutes does seem a little excessive. It's not like he was missing for 5 minutes. You know, while everyone seems to be gathered in one room and Patsy's loud and distraught, and everyone's sort of rallying around her, John seems to be quietly somewhere else. In her report, Linda Arndt also writes, at about 12:30 hours, I noticed that John Ramsey seemed to be by himself. John Ramsey was alone in the formal dining room area of the house. John Ramsey seemed to isolate himself from others. Early in the morning, I noticed that when John Ramsey was sitting down, he would look down and his leg would be bouncing. Now, I know what you're thinking. If the window was broken that morning, there'd be broken glass lying all over the place. Well, consider the following scenario. The crime scene is already staged when the police arrive, but the police quickly express their reservations about there being no signs of broken glass. Basically, no signs of forced entry. And upon reflection, as the officers alternatively request samples of John and Patsy's handwriting, does the thought occur to someone that the suspects identified, the housekeeper and Jeff Merrick, an ex-employee of Access Graphics, aren't going to be implicated by the handwriting of the ransom note? And so doesn't there need to be some sign of forced entry after all? But if the cops have already searched and excluded this possibility, isn't it too late? Well, not if the window is broken and the glass collected and hidden away or secreted from the scene. On the one hand, this scenario integrates the idea that the window was broken that morning after the police arrived, was broken by John. The glass was removed in order to match the absence of glass during the first sweeps. It also didn't make sense to alert anyone to the broken window just then, because that would draw attention to the rest of the basement and John Bonet would be discovered. Does that make sense? Now, there is a flaw in this theory. Within minutes of arriving at the Ramsey home, Fleet decided to look around the house. His own daughter had been missing a few months ago, and after the police were called, they found her hiding under the bed. Fleet was hoping that John Bonet too was just hiding somewhere in the house. Since everyone had been told by the police officers not to go upstairs, Fleet went down to the basement. He noticed that the lights were on. He found a small piece of glass from a broken window in a room used for model trains. Now, is it possible the window was broken so early in the investigation? In other words, within minutes of the police arriving? If so, why didn't Fleet White report the broken window to anyone? And why would John need to show Fleet the broken window when they went down to the basement just before he, quote-unquote, discovered John Bonet, if Fleet knew about it to begin with? What definitely makes this theory difficult to confirm one way or another is the fact that we don't have Fleet White's police statements to refer to, and certainly not in any detail. Now, besides John disappearing at certain times during the kidnapping phase, and besides when this all happened, the question arises, was the window broken from the inside or the outside? Now, it's interesting when John explained to Detective Steve Thomas in detail that it had been him who broke the basement window, Thomas asked John how exactly he had broken it. Steve Thomas said, "And what did you use to break the pane?" John Ramsey, I don't remember. Might have been my foot. I don't know. But here's the rub. Although a pea-shaped piece of glass was found inside the basement, a much bigger shard was found on the windowsill on the outside. And this could suggest two possibilities. The window was broken from the inside and that the glass was cleaned up, but not all of it. The presence of some broken glass is, I think, an important clue. But think about what is going on here. There's this allegation right in the beginning that the person who committed this crime is somebody who knows the Ramseys, who's familiar with the house. Someone like the housekeeper, someone like an ex-employee, someone who had been in that house before.
The person definitely has intelligence information about the Ramseys. The person is above average in intelligence, planned the crime beforehand, has been in the house before, has intimate knowledge about the household.
But look at where we are today. Now the intruder is a stranger intruder. So you can see how the thinking evolved from someone who had access to the house, who was familiar with the Ramseys, an inside job kind of person, to someone completely different. And that is why the broken glass of the basement window is elevated to be as important as it is. And you can only challenge this idea that the intruder is an outsider by looking at the handwriting of the ransom note. Either it was written by someone inside the house or it wasn't. What do you believe? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.